Hey guys, welcome back into Legacy. We're going to go back into Hero System today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the character creation basics and the characteristics, and then we'll be done with this. The character creation basics for Hero is a character point based system, and if you can see the table there on the screen cap, you can see that there's normal matching complications and all that. Don't worry about any of that nonsense right now because that'll be talked about when we talk about complications. Um, you want to look at the total points value. So you can do anything from 25 points for a character to 750 or more. Um, Generally speaking, the game is known as a 400 point game where everyone runs 400 point superheroes. But depending on what setting you're playing in, you could play 175 points and be very viable. And that's the basics of character creation. And so what you're going to do is you're going to spend those points on everything from stats to talents to skills to power creation, getting specific equipment, things like that. No, cat, I don't want you over here. Sorry, one of the cats trying to climb on me. Um, but that's where you're going to go. Character creation in this game is all point based. You're going to buy everything pretty much that you need. Uh, and that those points, while they seem like a lot, don't go as far as you think because of how much you're buying. This little table here is actually really nice because it shows you like how many points you're spending on superheroic characters. Like, oh look, I'm spending 280 points on characteristics. I'm spending 50 on skills, perks, and talents, and 70 on powers and equipment. If I want to be characteristic oriented, so it does a good job kind of breaking that down right here. I actually really like that, and heroic characters too. So let me get to the next table. You see. So here's all your characteristics for hero. You have strength, dex, con, intelligence, ego, and presence are your primary stats. What you call your primary stats. Uh, they indicate what they stand for. Uh, Presence and ego replace wisdom and charisma. They're pretty much the same analogs for the six stats in D&D. They start at 10. You can see how much it costs to buy them increases. Plus one character point per plus one strength. Two character points for plus one dex, um, and all that fun stuff. Sorry, I am surrounded by cats today. One cat. Go on, Artemis. Go. No, you're being bad. Sorry, cats are everywhere today. Um, and then you get into things like offensive combat value, defensive combat value, offensive mental combat, defensive mental combat. Those are going to be your combat stats. Pretty much what you're going to do when you roll to hit, you're going to roll 3d6. You're going to add your offensive combat value. Then you're going to subtract 11. That'll tell you what defensive combat value you hit. I mean, that's how you figure out defensive combat values. So the higher your defensive combat value, the better you are at defense. Mental values are against mental attacks like mind blast, things like that. Speed tells you how fast you act in combat, which is really nice. So speed is important to understand in that there's 12 phases. There's a 12-second turn, and this which is segmented into 12 different segments, each in 1 second. Your speed tells you how many of those you actually act in. So a speed 4 character acts 4 times in combat. There's a table for it. I'm not going to pull the table up. There's a table for it that tells you exactly how fast you can act. Physical and energy defenses. Whenever you take damage, you subtract your physical or energy defense from that. So it's kind of important to avoid that. Recovery tells you how fast you recover endurance and stun. Um, and or Stun and body. I'm sorry, endurance recovers differently. And so what you're doing is it's going to help you learn how to do that. We'll talk more about recovery when we talk about damages, and we talk about a little more about the actual rules. Endurance, body, and stun are your three types of basic health. Endurance, you're going to spend pretty much every turn when you act. Endurance is important because it allows you to use powers and things like that. Uh, Movement, all of that's going to wind up costing you endurance down the line. So, uh, body and stun. Body is physical damage. It's how hard you are to kill. It's your physical, bones breaking, bullets going through you type of damage. Stun, of course, is exhaustion, getting caught off guard, things like that. That's how you get knocked out. So that's the characteristics for this game. Um, Important thing to remember here is the characteristic roll. If you ever need to test against just a characteristic, it's equal to 9 plus the stat divided by 5. So if you have a 15 on a stat, your characteristic roll is a 12. I mean, it's literally that simple. Um, I've already gone through what offensive combat value does and defensive combat value does. As again, you roll 3d6, you add your offensive combat value, subtract 11. That tells you what defensive combat value you hit. Cat, go away. Swear. Um, you're on my hand, Bo. What are you doing on my hand? Get up and eat with me. Uh, and that's the basics of this. That's the basics of the characteristics, the basics of uh, all that part of it. As you guys can see, there's more to it. Movement, pretty important to know. Everyone moves 12, 4, and 4 when they run, swim, or leap. You can buy powers that allow you to move faster. There's a whole series of rolls. Using strength costs endurance. So every time you use a strength stat for anything, including dealing damage, you minus 1 endurance per every 10 points of strength you have. So as a standard. So you can adjust it as a GM if you need to, based on the type of campaign you're running. If you ever use multiple attacks in a phase, you subtract the endurance for each attack, which is pretty simplistic. And then there's an entire table here that gets into how much damage you do, how much can you lift, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to get into too much of that, but it gets pretty gnarly. So you can actually lift up to 25 kilotons and do 26 d6 damage. And the rest of this chapter, as you guys can kind of see, just talks about it. Presence has an ability called presence attacks, which we'll talk more about when we get into the actual rules. Presence attacks are literally you trying to intimidate or charm or otherwise use your presence to affect people. So they're actually a roll on that. And then it talks all, it does talk about reducing your characteristics and limited characteristics. And then there's also an ability in here called Maxima. Maxima is an optional role where you can, once you hit a certain point, purchasing attributes doubles in cost. It's a way to prevent people from munchkinning the game really hard. So if you're playing a fantasy game that's kind of a gritty, low fantasy, you build them as heroic characters, but you set your maxima at, say, 15 for each stat. There you go. Now you have a maxima of 15 for each of your stats. You can't, if you hit 15 in each stat, it's going to cost you double the points to raise it above 15. And there's the character's maximum table. It gives you the standards. Not, like I said, not very hard. You can do the same thing with skills, but and that's perfectly acceptable. It talks about raising your stats by experience points, which will adjust your skill ratings and everything else. And then the next part of this, guys, is skills. So we'll be talking about skills when we get back in this video series. I really love this this game. So hopefully that was a quick primer on how to deal with attributes, characteristics, and the basics of creation. I'm not going to get into super deep on it because super deep on it winds up you have to get into optional rules. You actually have to talk about the actual rules of the game. I want to save that for its own video. But anyways, guys, as always, welcome thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, and as always, I hope to see you guys around the game table.